Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening if you're watching this video late at night. Welcome back. In part 1a, we covered government types, democracy, and democracy took 20 minutes to talk about. And so we stopped the video and we have now part 1b, the other types of government types that are not democracy, and some ideologies and terms. Now, where are we going to start? We're going to be starting with communism, socialism, capitalism, and fascism. The definition of fascism: a political philosophy or movement or regime. Now, of course, it refers originally to one in Italy, but that is said, that exalts a nation and often raise above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe and economic regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. Also, a tendency towards actual exercise of strong autocratic or dictatorial rule. Other government system terms that we'll be learning about: classical liberalism, neoliberalism, free enterprise, right and left economics, social environment, libertarianism, authoritarianism, freedom versus law and order, which comes under the above, liberalism, conservatism, progressivism, tradition, individualism, and community. You could also add statism there. Okay, moving on. Classical liberalism, neoliberalism, and free enterprise. Okay, so we talked about capitalism in the very intro, and these are other types of labels that are interconnected with capitalism, in particular with a more strong view of capitalism, moving towards more capitalism, more property rights. And then we got right and left. Now, right and left is a very debatable spectrum because it can often be mislabeled and confused. If somebody says, I'm feeling like I'm on the right or left wing, what does it mean? What are they talking about? Are they talking about economics? Are they talking about social issues? Are they talking about economics? Are they talking about the environment? Or are they attempting to talk about libertarianism and authoritarianism, which all these spectrums are kind of somewhat connected but somewhat independent of each other, and it's debatable about how interconnected they are. An example of something that sort of breaks the whole left and right spectrum would be the policies of modern China today. Are they capitalist? Are they socialist, communist? What are they? All of the above, none of the above. It's a kind of a debate. They don't fit into a North American construct of how we think about left and right. Okay, next, social. So words that are used for the social spectrum would be liberalism or conservatism, progressive, or tradition. And sometimes, again, these are associated with a sort of a left and right axis, but not always, sometimes an up and down axis. And then left and right would be on the economic side. But again, that's a debate. And then there's, I guess, individualism and community. Individualism would tend to be more connected with libertarianism, and community, valuing the state, would be more connected with authoritarianism, maybe, but also community could be connected to communism. So it depends on who you're talking to, and that's sort of a whole different spectrum. I mean, should you have community organized, government-run garbage collection, or should each individual be personally responsible for their garbage disposal? I mean, where do you take that debate, and where do you fall on the spectrum of community versus individual on each particular issue? Okay, so there's a quick blast through that. Now we're going to go into further detail coming up. Okay, so the arrangement of positions along the left and right axis: progressive to reactionary or conservative to liberal communist to fascist socialist to capitalist to Democrat to Republican, is conceptually confused, ideology tendentious, and historically contingent, and any position along it's infested by contradictions. What does that mean? That means, like I said, the country of China contradicts some of the constructs that political spectrums have tried to assert. And many other countries also, and individuals, how it would be, I'm this way on this spectrum and that way on that spectrum, but it doesn't fit. Okay. Here's some examples of some spectrums. This spectrum here on the far left, it was created by an individual who valued the libertarian point of view. This spectrum is more used in Canada, this dual axis spectrum, where it has social progressive and social conservative as one of the axes, and economic left and economic right as an axis. Notice that the axis of libertarian versus authoritarian is not on this Canadian type axis that would often be used with something like Vote Compass. And you can see some other examples up here. Okay, two-dimensional political spectrum charts. Pros and cons. One dimension can be unclear and lead to information being communicated inaccurately. Two dimensions gives more information. The cons. Two-dimensional political spectrum charts. There's debate about which two spectrums are included. Two or more dimensions can be confusing for some people. Left and right policy compared. Left socialism and right capitalism. Okay, so here's where we're getting into the detail between socialism and capitalism, which would also include the other terms we were looking at, like free enterprise or neoliberalism would be on this side. Not to be confused with the kind of liberalism which is used in conjunction to compare with conservatism. Neoliberalism is about freedom of the marketplace, where liberalism being contrasted with conservatism is about more social freedom. So that can be a bit confusing. Okay. Socialism. The key thing you need to know is more government ownership of land and the means of production. And this is sort of a spectrum which can range all the way towards communism, which is maximum government ownership of land and the means of production. And then there's capitalism, free market enterprise, less government ownership to as little as possible on the far right side, if we're using the right-left spectrum, and less government ownership of the means of production. Now, so the idea with capitalism is that individuals and businesses have the right of ownership of land and the means of production and property. Okay, so what else is common on these sides? Less taxes, less spending is common on the economic right, capitalism, free enterprise side. And on the left, economic left, socialism side, you have higher taxes, more government programs. Now here is, again, a debate where more freedom and rights for individuals, maybe, that's very debatable, and more freedom and rights for landowners, more protections of rights to own property. That is typical part of capitalism, where it's about your right to own your capital, right to own your property. This is debated on this side, the freedom and rights for individuals. Some people would argue one way, some people would argue the other way. So this is a very debatable point here. Okay. However, here, freedom and rights for renters would conflict with the freedom and rights for property owners. So that could be an argument could be made there. And then regulation. So with regulation, there's always exceptions. On the capitalism free enterprise side, people would argue for less regulation for business. Now here's where less regulation for business sounds like, how does that compare to freedom and rights for individuals? So you can see the sort of contrast and similarity where somebody who might be like, I like less regulation for businesses, would also like less regulation for individuals, which is on that side. All right, but less regulation for businesses. Now there's an exception here. The exception for the regulation for businesses, except regulation that helps businesses like copyright law and patent law. So more regulation for businesses, things like protecting workers, making them safe, protection for the individuals, protection for the consumers. However, the idea of copyright law and patent law are a debatable form of regulation in terms of how good they are for the workers and consumers. Okay, left and right, social policy compared. Now this one is so very debatable, with full of generalizations where there's all kinds of exceptions and people can be all over the spectrum, back and forth. So really, you're breaking this down to a series of maybe generalizations and maybe exaggerations, and in the political debate on the news, you'll see constant exaggerations and trying to put people into boxes and categories that may or may not be accurate. But the generalization we have on the conservative traditional side is stay with tradition. The generalization on the progressive or small liberal, not to be associated necessarily with the Liberal Party, not to be confused with classical liberalism or neoliberalism, which are about the freedom of the economy and freedom of business to do business. But we've got the small liberal, which is about social freedom, social liberal, which is new ideas, progressive ideas, and that sort of social freedom. Okay, so a maybe. This is a very maybe, which could be a maybe true, maybe not. Values most other freedoms more than the freedom of religion, and a maybe values freedom of religion. Now another maybe here, values the rights of the community to have order, safety in the status quo, but again, that's highly debatable. And then maybe values the individual human rights more. Again, maybe. Maybe wants to keep the monarchy and traditions of the system, and then again, that's probably more historical constructs of how maybe a conservative party might have evolved, where they would be more into the traditions of the aristocracy and the monarchy. Okay, enrichment, left versus right. Is this political spectrum more misleading than useful? What do you think? Pause here for 2 minutes, discuss with a partner. What do you think about the left and right spectrum? Is it useful for communicating your opinions to say, I am on the left, I am on the right, or is that just completely confusing? Okay, if you've finished discussing, continue the video. Otherwise, pause the video and discuss right now.
I'm Mr. Beat. Let's watch some people talk about politics, shall we?
Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens, the right-wing super...
Now, if you have the time, follow through and watch that video. Otherwise, we're moving on in this video to take a look at something completely different. Now for a fun light moment. Story time! Having a baby in Canada versus the United States of America. And again, you are allowed to have your own opinions. What do you think? I am Canadian, so I live in the Canadian world where we have a mixture of some policies that are on the side of, or leaning towards the side of socialism, and some policies that lean toward the side of capitalism. But if we were to compare and contrast Canada to the United States of America, they have more people who are passionate about capitalism and the freedom of individuals to spend their money the way they like, with less taxes and less government interference. In Canada, we have higher taxes to pay for government programs and government owning the means of production, or some sort of examples of the government owning businesses would be the government owning BC Hydro in British Columbia, ICBC Insurance in British Columbia, BC Ferries in British Columbia. Okay, so story time. Having a baby in Canada, what do you think? I myself have had, with my wife doing the work, of course, my wife doing the hard work of having the baby, 3 boys. And in Canada, we are able to take time off work to spend time with our babies. And there are benefits available through the federal government and regulations to take time off work to have a baby, where in the United States, the protections and benefits are incredibly minimal to nothing. Once upon a time, my wife and I were traveling in the United States of America where we talked to a cashier, and she had a baby that was very, very, very small, the same size as ours. And we were like shopping and buying, and she saw our baby and she said, "I have a baby at home just your size." And we're like, "Okay, that's cute. Wait a minute. Well, why are you back at work so soon if you have a baby at home?" Well, she explained she saved up $15,000 to have a baby with her husband, and then the hospital fees cost $10,000, and she only had $5,000 left to take time off work, and she had to go back to work early. And so there's a couple things that are different. In Canada, we didn't have to pay hospital fees. That was paid for by the government, and that's an example of socialism, or a policy that leans towards socialism. And then we also were able to take off a lot of time with help from a program called the Unemployment Insurance of the federal government of Canada, and also the employer kicked in a portion as well. Here's the baby.
No, that's good, Bob. That's good.
This is a French song playing in the background. One of the things we were able to do while we took time off work with our baby was able to travel to Quebec and learn more French. There's a baby. Okay, so there's the text that explains that. We're going to skip that slide for the sake of time. Quick flash review from grade 9 and earlier grades and other grades. Government system terms. Okay, so we got monarchy, constitutional monarchy, absolute monarchy, theocracy, republic, empire, imperialism, aristocracy, and oligarchy, which you may or may not have learned some or all of these terms. You may want to use these terms as you're writing about Canadian politics going forward into the future and comparing and contrast Canada to other countries. Okay, monarchy. There is a monarch, king, queen, or equivalent, which still remains true. Canada still has a queen, although symbolic. Constitutional monarchy. That also remains true. The monarch is limited by a constitution. We're going to be talking a lot more about the constitution coming up. Absolute monarchy. The monarch has absolute power. Theocracy. Religious leaders have most of the power. Republic. There is no monarch. And something to remember, there are many kinds of republics, ranging from oligarchy and democracy. Empire. Imperialism. There is an emperor or empress who rules over multiple regions, states, or people groups or colonies, often added to the empire by military force or other form of force. And this is relevant because at the time of the founding of Canada, the British Empire was leaning a lot more towards empire and imperialism. In particular, the capital of British Columbia. I live in the province of BC, British Columbia. The capital of British Columbia is named after the Empress Queen Victoria. And there's a whole story about how when British Columbia was choosing the flag was originally going to have the sun at the top of the British Columbian flag. The Queen Victoria, the Empress, did not like that because she was insulted by the idea that the sun would set over the British Empire and the sun should never set over the British Empire. Therefore, the flag was fixed so that the British Empire was on the top over the sun, which means the very flag of British Columbia goes back to having the flavor of being inspired and connected and created and designed with imperialism in mind. Okay, going on to aristocracy and oligarchy. There's an elite group where power is concentrated, and this is an important word to think about when you're describing people's political thinking and in the past as well as the present. End of part 1, government types, ideologies. How fast were we in this video? Thank you very kindly for your time and paying attention. Coming up, we are going to be going on to Part 2, the Canadian federal government. Now it's time for outtakes. Hey, you forgot about talking about workers and unions. You didn't talk about workers in this video. What? Well, what you missed when you were talking about right capitalism, left socialism, was you forgot about, on this side, workers. So you've got here more freedom and rights for renters and individuals, but you forgot to mention the word workers. And sometimes when people talk about left socialism, they're thinking that it means big government, but it's a bigger government to protect the rights of the people, to protect the rights of the workers, which leads to better conditions for workers, according to people who value the left in socialism. Wait a minute. What do you mean, protect workers? You know what protects workers best, according to the capitalists? Capitalism protects the workers. You know why they say that? They say that because capitalism creates jobs. And how does capitalism create jobs? It creates a stronger economy, which creates better conditions for workers, so workers can get higher wage through capitalism, for free enterprise and the free economy. How does that all work out for the workers? Well, there's more jobs and there's better jobs according to capitalism. And capitalism also allows the freedom for innovators to create innovations which make life better for not just the workers but also the consumers. The innovation, without the sense of freedom of capitalism, it stifles the creativity of the innovators. If you think of companies like Microsoft and Apple, innovation happens like that under capitalism. And you know what the capitalists would say? They would say anything that government can do, businesses can do better and cheaper. Better and cheaper. That's why you should let businesses do that work. No, 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 Mr. Capitalist. The only way businesses can do things better and cheaper is by underpaying us workers. That's right. You're not paying workers a fair salary. You're overworking them. You're not giving them safety equipment. That's how you can reduce the cost and do things cheaper. If you were to pay the workers a fair salary, then the capitalist business would not be as efficient. Now, okay, Mr. Capitalist and Mr. Worker, you don't have to be so contradictory. There's room for people in different places on this political spectrum. There's room for compromise. There's room to work together. Hello, it's Captain Canada, and in Canada there's both examples of capitalism and policy that leans towards socialism. So, you just need to be able to identify which policy is which. How do you do that? Let's think about a few examples. Buying a piece of land. Does that sound like A, capitalism, B, socialism? Do 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 do. Buying a car that you own privately. Does that sound like A, capitalism, B, socialism? Do 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 do. Buying a car leans towards A, capitalism. Constructing and using the SkyTrain public transit system, which is owned by the government. Does that sound like it leans more towards socialism or capitalism? Do 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 do. Building a library and or taking a book out from a government-owned library. Does that sound more like socialism or capitalism in action? Do 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 do. Library. Taking a book out from the library sounds a little bit more like leaning towards socialism, whereas buying a book at Chapters would lean towards capitalism because you would own that book. Okay, discussion time. Discuss with a partner. Try and think of 5 examples of capitalism and 5 examples of socialism. For example, which one would you put in which category? Walmart, BC Hydro, ICBC, Costco, BC Ferries, BC Liquor, Fitness World, Workout Club, Guildford Rec Fitness in the Guildford Community Center of City of Surrey. Now it's time for the joke. There were 2 cows and a farmer, and then what? Cut. Don't tell that joke. Stop.